Welcome to HOA Rulebook. Keep your phone ready for this one. Karen shoved a folder under her arm and screamed that the file belonged to the HOA, not me. You are not going to pretend you did not hear me. Her voice echoed down the sidewalk, cutting through the evening quiet like a siren. I stood there in my driveway, phone in hand, recording light on, and kept my mouth shut. This was not the first time Betty Davis had come at me with a stack of papers and a self-righteous fury, but it was the first time I realized she was repeating herself. Same folder, same complaint, same violation that had supposedly been resolved 8 months ago. I work as an apartment maintenance supervisor in Chicago, which means I have seen every kind of complaint, every kind of tenant meltdown, and every kind of paperwork shuffle. I know when something does not add up. And this, standing in front of my townhouse in the Parkside Homeowners Association master-planned community, did not add up at all. Betty took a step closer, her blue blazer wrinkled at the elbows, her retractable badge reel with a blank card bouncing against her chest. The golden hour glare cut long shadows across the pavement, and I could see a couple on the porch 2 units down watching us like we were the evening entertainment. She jabbed a finger at me. I do not negotiate with violations. That is what she always said. That was her line. She had used it on me before, and I had heard her use it on at least 3 other neighbors in the group chat. But this time, the folder she was waving had my address on it, my name on it, and a violation date that matched a case I thought was closed. I let her talk. Every word was helping me. She did not know that yet. She thought she was shutting me down, thought she was putting me in my place with her procedural theater and her laminated policy sheet tucked under one arm. But I had started keeping notes. I had started saving screenshots. And 8 months ago, when this same violation had first appeared, I had filed a records request with the management company. They had sent me a response that said the complaint was resolved and the file was closed. Now here was Betty, standing in my driveway at dusk, telling me the file was never closed and I owed the HOA a fine plus late fees. I took a breath and kept the phone steady. My elderly parent was staying with me for the next 2 months while recovering from surgery, and the last thing I needed was HOA drama spilling into the house and adding stress to an already tight situation. Betty did not care. She never cared. She was the social committee chair, but everyone in Parkside knew her real job was spreading rumors and finding new ways to weaponize the rulebook. She had a talent for it. She could take a vague guideline about lawn maintenance and turn it into a 3-page notice with deadlines, photo requirements, and a cure checklist that changed every time you thought you were in compliance. Go ahead and call whoever you want, Betty said, her voice dripping with mock patience. I have a committee for that. She smiled, the kind of smile that said she knew she had backup, knew she had the management company on speed dial, knew she could outlast me in any procedural fight. That line stuck with me. I have a committee for that. It was so smug, so practiced, that it felt rehearsed. Like she had said it before, like she had used it to shut down other people who asked too many questions. I glanced past her. The couple on the porch had their phones out now. I was not the only one recording. Betty did not notice. She was too busy flipping through the folder, pulling out a sheet of paper with no readable text, and shoving it toward me. "This is your notice," she said. "You missed a hearing. You did not show up. You are in default." That was the moment I felt the cold knot in my stomach tighten. I had never been told about a hearing. I checked my mailbox every day. I checked my email obsessively. I had not missed anything because there had been nothing to miss. I asked her when the hearing was. She told me a date 3 weeks ago. I asked her where the notice was sent. She told me certified mail. I asked her for the tracking number. She told me it was not her job to provide that information. Then she told me I could request it through the management company, but I would need to submit a written request and wait 10 business days. I was starting to see the pattern. Every time I asked for proof, she added a new hoop. Every time I cleared a hoop, she moved the goalpost. Betty folded the paper back into the folder and tucked it under her arm again. She adjusted the badge reel clip to her blazer, a cheap plastic thing that served no real function except to make her feel official. Then she pulled out her phone and started scrolling. "I am calling the tow company," she said. "Your car is not in compliance with the parking rules, and if you are in default on a violation, I am authorized to have it removed. My car was parked in my own driveway. There was no rule against that. There had never been a rule against that." But Betty was already dialing, and I could see the neighbor on the porch shaking his head. That was the moment I decided to reopen the case. Not just my case, the original case. The one from 8 months ago that had started this whole mess. Because if Betty was willing to lie about a hearing, willing to threaten a tow over a parking spot that was not even in violation, then I needed to know what else she had lied about. I needed to know if this was just bad judgment or if it was something bigger. Something deliberate. Something that had been going on long enough that it had left a trail. The tow truck showed up 15 minutes later. I had not moved. Betty had not moved. We stood there in the driveway like two fighters waiting for the bell, and when the flatbed rolled up, the driver got out and immediately looked uncomfortable. He was a big guy, maybe mid-40s, wearing a stained company shirt and holding a clipboard. Betty walked over to him and started talking fast, gesturing at my car, at me, at the folder under her arm. The driver nodded a few times, then looked at me. He asked if the car was mine. I said yes. He asked if I was parked illegally. I said no. He asked Betty for the authorization paperwork. That was when things got interesting. Betty pulled out a sheet from the folder and handed it to the driver. He squinted at it under the streetlight, flipped it over, then handed it back. "Ma'am, this is not a tow authorization," he said. "This is a violation notice. I need a signed authorization from the management company or a parking enforcement officer." Betty's face went red. She started talking louder, faster, insisting that as a board member she had the authority to authorize a tow. The driver shook his head. He told her he could not proceed without the proper paperwork. Then he looked at me and said he was sorry for the confusion. Betty tried to cut him off, but he was already walking back to the truck. Karen insists the tow is authorized, and the tow driver hesitates. That was the funny karma moment. Betty had been so confident, so sure of her procedural dominance, that she had called a tow truck without actually having the legal authority to do it. And now the driver, who clearly did not want to get pulled into an HOA dispute, was leaving. Betty stood there holding the folder, mouth open as the flatbed pulled away. The couple on the porch clapped. I did not smile. I just saved the video to my phone and went inside. The next morning, I pulled out every piece of paper I had from the original case. I had a stack of certified mail slips, all of them showing delivery confirmation for notices I had never received. I had email threads with the management company, all of them showing me asking for clarification and them responding with vague instructions. I had a copy of the rulebook, a printed PDF that the HOA had sent out 2 years ago, and it had no mention of the parking rule Betty had cited. I had photos of my property from 8 months ago, time-stamped, showing that the original violation was bogus. And I had a public records response from the county showing prior complaints against Betty for the same behavior. She had done this before. She had targeted other homeowners with fake violations, moved goalposts, and buried them in paperwork until they gave up or paid. I called the management company. I got a receptionist who transferred me to a property manager named Laura. Laura sounded tired. She told me she would look into it. I told her I wanted the hearing notice, the tow authorization, and the original complaint file. She told me I needed to submit a written request. I told her I had already submitted a request 8 months ago and had been told the file was closed. She paused. Then she told me she would check the records and call me back. I did not hold my breath. 2 days later, I got an email. The email said the file was under review and I should expect a response within 10 business days. No apology. No acknowledgement that something was wrong. just a procedural stall. I forwarded the email to my neighbor, the one who had been on the porch watching the tow truck scene. His name was Marcus, and he had lived in Parkside for 6 years. He had seen Betty pull this exact routine on at least 4 other people. He agreed to be a witness if I needed one. He also told me something interesting. He told me that 2 years ago there had been a big fight over missing HOA funds. The board had hired an auditor, the auditor had found discrepancies, and then the whole thing had been quietly swept under the rug. No one ever got a report. No one ever got answers. And Betty had been on the board the entire time. I started digging. I filed another public records request, this time with the county clerk, asking for any complaints filed against the Parkside Homeowners Association or its board members in the last 5 years. I paid the fee. I waited. While I waited, I went through the neighborhood group chat archives. I found posts from 3 years ago where a homeowner named Daniel had complained about a violation that matched mine almost exactly. Same type of notice, same missing hearing, same threat of a tow. Daniel had eventually paid the fine because he could not afford to fight it. He had moved out 6 months later. I sent him a message. He responded within an hour. He told me he still had copies of everything. He told me Betty had personally delivered his notices, always at odd hours, always with a witness who would back her up. He told me he was convinced the whole thing was a shakedown. I got a text from Marcus. He told me Betty had just posted in the group chat a long message about HOA compliance and the importance of respecting board authority. She had included a screenshot, cropped tight, showing part of an email thread that made it look like I had ignored multiple warnings. The crop cut off the dates. It cut off the context. It made me look like the problem. The group chat exploded. Half the people believed the crop. Half the people asked for the full thread. Betty did not respond. She just posted another message saying that privacy rules prevented her from sharing more details. Marcus called it out. He posted a reply saying he had witnessed the tow incident and that Betty had failed to provide proper authorization. 3 people liked his comment. Betty deleted it and kicked him from the chat. That was the side complication. Betty had turned the neighborhood against me, or at least tried to, and now I had to fight the HOA dispute and the court of public opinion at the same time. My parent asked me what was going on. I tried to explain it calmly, but I could hear the frustration in my own voice. The stress was making everything harder. I needed to stay focused. I needed to keep building the case. I needed to prove that this was not just about me, that this was about a pattern of abuse that had been going on for years. The county clerk sent me a packet. It was thick. It included 3 formal complaints filed against the Parkside HOA board in the last 4 years. All 3 complaints mentioned Betty by name. All 3 complaints described violations that were either fabricated or selectively enforced. One complaint included an affidavit from a homeowner who said Betty had backdated a notice to make it look like they had missed a deadline. Another complaint included photos showing that the violations cited in the notice did not match the actual property conditions. The third complaint was from Daniel. He had filed it 2 months before he moved out. The complaint had been dismissed because he did not show up to the follow-up hearing. He told me later that he had never been notified about the hearing. Sound familiar? I scheduled a meeting with Laura at the management company office. She agreed to meet me in person, which surprised me. I brought Marcus. I brought my binder. I brought printed copies of the county complaints, the email threads, the certified mail slips, and the original violation notice. Laura met us in a small conference room with glass walls. She looked tired. She told me she had reviewed the file and found some inconsistencies. I asked her what kind of inconsistencies. She said the hearing notice had been generated in the system, but there was no record of it being mailed. I asked her who generated it. She hesitated. Then she said Betty had submitted the request. I opened the binder and walked her through the timeline. I showed her the original violation from 8 months ago. I showed her the email where the management company had told me the file was closed. I showed her the new notice Betty had delivered 3 weeks ago, claiming I had missed a hearing that had never been scheduled. I showed her the county complaints showing that Betty had done this before. Laura took notes. She told me she would need to escalate this to the board president. I asked her who the board president was. She told me it was Betty. That was the moment I realized how deep this went. Betty was not just a rogue board member. She was running the board. She controlled the meeting agendas. She controlled the vendor contracts. She controlled who got to speak at hearings and who got silenced. And the management company, which was supposed to provide oversight, was either complicit or too afraid to push back. I asked Laura if the management company had ever audited the board's decision-making process. She did not answer directly. She just said that the management company provided administrative support and did not have authority over board actions. I asked her if the management company had a duty to report fraud. She stood up and said she needed to consult with her supervisor. Marcus and I left the office. He told me he thought we had her. I told him I was not sure. I told him that unless we had something that tied Betty directly to a crime or a cover-up, the board could just claim it was all a misunderstanding and move on. We needed something concrete. Something that proved intent. Something that forced consequences. I went home and opened my laptop. I pulled up the HOA portal, the online system where homeowners could view notices, pay fees, and submit maintenance requests. I logged in and started clicking through the audit logs. Most HOAs do not give homeowners access to audit logs, but Parkside had a transparency feature that no one ever used. I found the logs for my account. I found the entry for the hearing notice. It had been created 3 weeks ago at 11:47 p.m. by an account registered to Betty. It had been marked as mailed, but there was no tracking number. I clicked on the notice itself. The PDF metadata showed a creation date that matched the log entry. But when I opened the Properties panel, I saw something else. The template file had been created 8 months ago, the same day the original violation had been filed. That was the first concrete clue. Betty had not just recycled a violation. She had created a template 8 months ago, sat on it, and then reused it to generate a fake hearing notice when she needed to escalate. That was not a mistake. That was premeditation. I saved the screenshots. I saved the metadata. I sent copies to Marcus and to Daniel. Then I went back through the portal logs and started looking at other accounts. I found 3 other homeowners who had similar entries. All of them showed hearing notices generated late at night. All of them showed the same template file ID. All of them had been created by Betty. I called Daniel. I told him what I had found. He told me he still had his login credentials for the portal. He logged in and checked his own audit log. He found the same thing. A notice generated at midnight, no tracking number, and a template file that had been created weeks before the supposed violation. He told me he was willing to go on the record. He told me he was willing to testify if it came to that. I told him to save everything. The next day, I got a call from Laura. She told me the board had scheduled an emergency meeting to address my complaint. She told me I was invited to attend, but that I would not be allowed to speak unless the board granted me permission. I asked her when the meeting was. She told me it was in 2 hours. I asked her how I was supposed to prepare for a meeting with 2 hours' notice. She told me that was the board's decision. I told her I would be there. I told her I was bringing a witness. She told me that witnesses were not allowed unless they were on the agenda. I told her I was bringing a witness anyway. I grabbed the binder. I grabbed my phone. I grabbed Marcus. We drove to the community clubhouse where the board held meetings. It was a small building near the entrance to Parkside, with a parking lot that was already full when we arrived. We walked in. The meeting room was packed. At least 20 homeowners were sitting in folding chairs facing a long table at the front. Betty sat in the center chair. She had a gavel in front of her. She had a stack of papers. She had a laminated agenda card. She looked calm. She looked prepared. She looked like she had been expecting this. The meeting started. Betty banged the gavel once and announced that the board was convening to address a compliance matter involving my property. She did not mention my name. She did not mention the violation. She just said that the board had reviewed the file and determined that the homeowner in question was in default. She said the board had the authority to impose fines, authorize a lien, and restrict access to community amenities. Then she said the homeowner would be given an opportunity to speak, but only after the board had presented its findings. I stood up. Betty banged the gavel again. She told me to sit down. She told me I was out of order. Marcus stood up next to me. Betty told him he was not on the agenda and needed to leave. The room went silent. I did not sit down. I opened the binder and held up the first page. I told Betty that I had proof she had fabricated the hearing notice. I told her I had audit logs showing she had created the template 8 months ago and reused it to generate a fake notice 3 weeks ago. I told her I had county records showing she had done this to at least 3 other homeowners. Betty banged the gavel again. She told me I was making false accusations and that I would be held liable for defamation. I told her I had witnesses. I told her I had screenshots. I told her I had metadata. She told me to sit down or she would have me removed. I asked her who was going to remove me. She looked at the board members on either side of her. They both looked away. Then the door opened. A man walked in. He was wearing a suit. He introduced himself as the regional manager for the property management company. He told Betty that the meeting needed to be paused. He told her that the management company had received a formal complaint alleging procedural violations and potential fraud. He told her that until the complaint was resolved, the board could not take any enforcement action against me. Betty stood up. She told him he had no authority to suspend board proceedings. He told her that the management company had the authority to suspend administrative support, which meant no notices could be generated, no hearings could be scheduled, and no liens could be filed. Then he told her that the management company was opening an internal investigation and that Betty would need to provide access to all board communications and files. Betty sat down. Her face went from red to white. The meeting fell apart. Half the homeowners started asking questions. The other board members started whispering to each other. Marcus leaned over and told me that was the trigger moment. The management rep had said the quiet part out loud. He had admitted that this was how they always did it. That Betty ran the show, that the management company rubber-stamped her decisions, and that no one had ever pushed back hard enough to force accountability. I told Marcus to record everything. He pulled out his phone. Betty saw him and shouted that recording was not allowed. Marcus kept recording. Another homeowner pulled out her phone and started recording too. Betty banged the gavel 3 more times and declared the meeting adjourned. Then she grabbed her stack of papers and walked out. I followed her into the parking lot. Marcus followed me. Betty was walking fast, heading toward a sedan parked near the exit. I called her name. She did not stop. I called her name again. She spun around. She told me I was harassing her. I told her I had one question. She told me she did not have to answer my questions. I asked her anyway. I asked her about the missing HOA funds from 2 years ago. I asked her if the audit had ever been completed. I asked her if she had been part of the cover-up. Her face went red again. She told me that was a closed matter and that I had no right to bring it up. Then she got in her car and drove away. I went back inside. The regional manager was still there. He was talking to the other board members. I walked up and introduced myself. I told him I had additional evidence that might be relevant to the investigation. I handed him a thumb drive. He asked me what was on it. I told him audit logs, metadata screenshots, county complaint records, and witness statements. He told me he would review it. Then he asked me if I was willing to participate in a formal interview. I told him yes. He gave me his card and told me to call his office the next day to schedule it. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the audit from 2 years ago. I kept thinking about the missing funds. I kept thinking about Betty's reaction when I had brought it up. She had not denied it. She had just said it was closed. That was not the reaction of someone who had nothing to hide. That was the reaction of someone who knew exactly what I was talking about and did not want me digging any deeper. I got out of bed and opened my laptop. I went back to the HOA portal. I clicked through the financial reports section. Most of the reports were locked, but there was a summary page that showed budget allocations and expense categories. I found the line item for legal and administrative fees. It had spiked 2 years ago. Then it had dropped back to normal levels. I clicked on the details. The system asked for a password. I tried my login credentials. No luck. Then I tried the default admin password that most HOA portals use. It worked. The details page loaded. It showed a spreadsheet with monthly fees broken out by vendor. I scrolled down. I found an entry for a law firm that had been paid $15,000 in June 2 years ago. The description said audit response and regulatory compliance. I clicked on the vendor name. The system pulled up a contact page. The law firm was based in Indianapolis. I wrote down the name. Then I kept scrolling. I found another entry, this one for a consulting firm paid $10,000 in July 2 years ago. The description said board training and governance review. I clicked on that vendor. The system showed an address in Chicago, but when I Googled the address, it was a virtual office space. No physical location. No staff. No website. I saved the screenshots. The next morning, I called the law firm in Indianapolis. I asked to speak to someone about a client engagement from 2 years ago. The receptionist asked me which client. I told her Parkside Homeowners Association. She put me on hold. A minute later, a lawyer picked up. He told me he could not discuss client matters without authorization. I told him I was a homeowner in Parkside and I was trying to verify whether the legal fees billed to the HOA were legitimate. He told me that was an internal HOA matter and I needed to direct my questions to the board. I told him the board was under investigation for fraud. He paused. Then he told me he would need to consult with his partners and call me back. He never called back. I called the consulting firm. The number was disconnected. I Googled the firm name. I found one result, a cached web page from 3 years ago advertising HOA governance consulting services. The page listed a single consultant, a man named Richard Klein. I Googled his name. I found a LinkedIn profile that had not been updated in 2 years. The profile said he had worked for several HOA management companies in the Midwest. I sent him a message. He responded an hour later. He told me he remembered the Parkside engagement. He told me he had been hired by Betty to conduct a board training session after the audit discrepancies had been discovered. He told me the training had been a formality and that no real changes had been implemented. Then he told me something else. He told me that during the training, Betty had mentioned that the board had a monthly fee goal and that she was proud of hitting the numbers. He said it had struck him as odd, because HOA boards are not supposed to have revenue goals. They are supposed to have budget targets. Revenue goals implied they were finding ways to generate fees beyond what was necessary to cover expenses. That was the twist. Betty had turned the HOA into a profit center. She had been generating fake violations, imposing fines, and collecting fees that went into the general fund. The management company had gone along with it because they got a percentage of the collections. And the board had stayed silent because Betty controlled the agenda and the votes. I had my hidden spreadsheet. I had my proof of intent. I had my smoking gun. I called Marcus. I told him what I had found. He told me I needed to go public. I told him I needed to go to the authorities first. He agreed. We decided to take everything to the sheriff. I packaged the evidence, the audit logs, the metadata screenshots, the county complaints, the financial spreadsheet screenshots, the consulting firm statement, and the tow dispatch logs showing Betty had called for a tow without proper authority. I put it all on a thumb drive. Then I called the regional manager and told him I was filing a formal complaint with law enforcement. He told me that was my right. He told me the management company would cooperate with any investigation. The next day I drove to the sheriff's substation on the north side of Chicago. I walked in with Marcus. We asked to speak to a deputy about a fraud complaint. The deputy at the front desk directed us to a small office. A detective came out. He introduced himself as Detective Harris. We sat down. I handed him the thumb drive. I walked him through the timeline. I showed him the evidence. He listened. He took notes. Then he asked me a question. He asked me if I had any direct proof that Betty had personally benefited from the fake violations. I told him I did not have that yet. He told me that without proof of personal benefit, it was going to be hard to prove fraud. It might be mismanagement. It might be procedural abuse. But unless Betty had pocketed the money, it was not a criminal matter. I told him I understood. Then I asked him what I should do. He told me to keep documenting everything and to file a civil complaint with the board oversight agency. He told me that if the investigation turned up evidence of criminal activity, he would reopen the case. I left the substation. I felt deflated. I had done everything right. I had gathered the evidence. I had followed the process. And now I was being told that unless I could prove Betty had stolen money, the system could not help me. Marcus could see it on my face. He told me not to give up. He told me the civil complaint was still an option. He told me that public pressure could force change even if the criminal system would not act. I told him I would think about it. That night I got a message from Daniel. He told me he had gone back through his old files and found something. He found a check. The check was for $200, made out to the Parkside HOA, dated 2 years ago. The memo line said compliance fine. But the check had never been cashed. Daniel had kept a copy of it because he had been paranoid about the HOA claiming he had not paid. He sent me a photo. The check number matched an entry in the financial spreadsheet I had pulled from the portal, but the entry showed the payment as received and deposited. If the check had never been cashed, where had the money gone? That was the second concrete clue. Betty had marked payments as received even when they had not been processed. That meant either the accounting was sloppy or someone was covering up missing funds. I asked Daniel if he had the bank statement showing the check had not cleared. He said yes. I told him to hold on to it. I told him we were going to need it. I called the regional manager again. I told him about the uncashed check. I told him I needed access to the full financial records, not just the summary page. He told me that required board approval. I told him the board was under investigation and could not be trusted to approve access to records that might incriminate them. He told me he would consult with the legal team. 2 days later, I got an email. The email said the management company was conducting a full audit of the Parkside HOA accounts and that all enforcement actions were suspended pending the outcome. It also said that Betty had been removed from her board positions and that an interim board president had been appointed. I forwarded the email to Marcus and Daniel. Marcus replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Daniel replied asking if I thought it was over. I told him I did not think so. I told him Betty was not the type to go quietly. I was right. 2 weeks later, I got a notice in the mail. It was from a law firm in downtown Chicago. The notice said that Betty Davis had filed a defamation lawsuit against me, Marcus, and Daniel. The suit claimed that we had made false statements about her conduct as a board member and that those statements had damaged her reputation and caused her emotional distress. The suit demanded a retraction, a public apology, and $50,000 in damages. I read the notice 3 times. Then I called Marcus. He had gotten the same notice. So had Daniel. We scheduled a call. On the call, Daniel was panicking. He said he could not afford a lawyer. He said he could not afford to fight a lawsuit. Marcus was calmer. He said the lawsuit was a slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation designed to intimidate us into silence. He said we needed to file an anti-slap P motion and get the case dismissed. I agreed. I told them I would find a lawyer. I told them we were not backing down. I found a lawyer through a referral from the detective. Her name was Sandra Cho. She specialized in HOA disputes and civil rights cases. I met with her the next day. I brought the binder. I brought the thumb drive. I brought the lawsuit notice. She reviewed everything. Then she told me the lawsuit was garbage. She said Betty had no case. She said the statements we had made were either provably true or protected opinion. She said we could file an anti-slap motion and probably get it dismissed within a few months. But she also told me something else. She told me that the lawsuit was a distraction. She told me Betty was trying to tie us up in court while the management company finished the audit and buried the findings. She told me we needed to move faster. She told me we needed to force the audit results into the open before Betty could spin the narrative. Sandra filed the anti-slap motion the next week. She also filed a public records request with the Illinois Attorney General, asking for any complaints filed against the Parkside HOA or its board members. And she filed a motion in small claims court on behalf of Daniel, demanding a refund of the compliance fine he had paid 2 years ago. All 3 filings hit at the same time. The goal was to overwhelm Betty and the board, to force them to respond on multiple fronts, and to create a public record that could not be buried. It worked. The management company released a preliminary audit report. The report found discrepancies in the financial records, inconsistencies in the violation notices, and procedural failures in the hearing process. The report recommended that the board implement new policies, retrain all members, and refund any fees collected based on improper notices. The report did not mention Betty by name, but it did not have to. Everyone knew. The neighborhood group chat exploded again. This time, the tide had turned. People were asking questions. People were demanding accountability. People were posting their own stories about fake violations and procedural abuse. Betty tried to respond. She posted a long message saying the audit was incomplete and that the findings were being misrepresented. She said she had always acted in good faith and that the board had followed all applicable rules. She said the lawsuit was necessary to protect the integrity of the HOA. No one believed her. The interim board president posted a response saying that the board would hold a special meeting to discuss the audit findings and that all homeowners were invited to attend. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. The meeting was chaos. At least 50 homeowners showed up. The room was standing room only. The interim board president opened the meeting and read a prepared statement. He said the board took the audit findings seriously. He said the board was committed to transparency and accountability. He said the board would implement a requirement that all violations include photo proof and a cure checklist. He said the board would publish standards and timelines to all homeowners. He said Betty Davis would receive a written warning for harassment behavior. The room erupted. People started shouting questions. People started demanding more than a warning. The interim board president banged the gavel and called for order. Then he opened the floor for public comment. I was the first to speak. I walked to the front. I opened the binder. I read the timeline. I showed the audit logs. I showed the county complaints. I showed the uncashed check. I showed the metadata. I told the room that this was not just about me. I told them it was about a pattern of abuse that had gone on for years. I told them Betty had turned the HOA into a profit center, that she had generated fake violations to hit monthly fee goals, and that the management company had enabled her. I told them the board needed to do more than issue a warning. I told them the board needed to hold Betty accountable, refund the improper fees, and fire the management company. When I finished, The room applauded. I sat down. Marcus spoke next. Then Daniel. Then 3 other homeowners who had been targeted by Betty. By the time the last person finished, the interim board president looked exhausted. He told the room that the board would take all the comments under advisement and would issue a follow-up report within 30 days. Betty stood up. She walked to the front. She did not ask for permission to speak. She just started talking. She said the entire proceeding was a witch hunt. She said I had orchestrated a smear campaign. She said the audit was biased. She said the board was caving to mob pressure. She said she had dedicated years of her life to Parkside and this was how she was being repaid. Then, she said something that sealed her fate. She said that if the homeowners did not like the way the HOA was run, they were free to move. The room went silent. Then someone in the back shouted, "You first." Betty's face went red. She told the room she did not have to tolerate this abuse. Then she walked out. For the second time, I followed her. This time we ended up in the parking lot again. Marcus was with me. So was Sandra, my lawyer. Betty saw us coming and stopped. She turned around. She told us to leave her alone. Sandra stepped forward. She told Betty that the anti-SLAPP motion had been granted and that the defamation lawsuit had been dismissed with prejudice. She told Betty that Daniel's small claims motion had been granted and that Betty personally owed him $200 plus court costs. She told Betty that the Attorney General's office had opened an investigation into the Parkside HOA and that Betty would be required to provide testimony. Then Sandra told Betty that if she filed any additional lawsuits or made any additional public statements about me, Marcus, or Daniel, she would face sanctions for malicious prosecution. Betty did not say anything. She just got in her car and drove away. 3 months later, the final audit report was released. The report found that Betty had improperly generated at least 15 violation notices over a 2-year period. The report found that the management company had failed to verify the legitimacy of the notices before processing them. The report found that the financial discrepancies from 2 years ago had been caused by improper accounting and that several payments had been marked as received when they had not been processed. The report recommended that the board refund all improper fees, terminate the contract with the management company, and adopt a new set of governance policies that included mandatory training, regular audits, and a homeowner appeals process. The board accepted all the recommendations. Betty resigned from the board. The management company's contract was terminated. And I got a check in the mail for the fine I had been threatened with, plus interest. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild HOA drama and satisfying revenge stories. The Parkside Homeowners Association is different now. The new board is transparent. The new management company is responsive. The rules are clear. And Betty Davis is no longer involved. I still see her sometimes driving through the neighborhood. She does not look at me. She does not wave. She just drives past like I am not there. That is fine with me. I do not need her acknowledgement. I just needed her to stop. And she did. Marcus still lives next door. We have coffee sometimes and talk about what happened. Daniel moved back to Parkside 6 months ago. He bought a house 2 streets over. He told me he felt safe coming back now that Betty was gone. I told him I was glad. The cold case is closed. The missing money was explained. The forged paperwork was exposed. The suspicious towing was stopped. The altered minutes were corrected. And the person responsible was held accountable. It took months. It took evidence. It took persistence. But it worked. The system is slow, but it is not broken. You just have to be willing to push. You just have to be willing to document everything. You just have to be willing to stand up when someone tries to intimidate you into silence. Because if you do not, people like Betty will keep doing what they have always done. They will keep moving the goalposts. They will keep generating fake violations. They will keep threatening tows and fines and liens. And they will keep getting away with it. Until someone stops them. I stopped Betty. And it felt good. Glad you tuned in today.